activities you participated in during the civil rights marches, 67 to 69. What did you do?
Well, there were a lot of things. At that time, I was working as a graphics manager for the old Milwaukee Star newspaper. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work with Marilyn Morehouser, whose name may come up again, as well as Walter Jones and Jay Anderson, Richard Carter, and that bunch, and Lloyd Barbie. So I was involved working with those people there, as well as, and I had a family at the time, participating in some of the meetings with what's the guy's name? James Grappy, and the youth council. And I can tell you, I didn't do a lot of marching. Okay, I don't have the aptitude to do a lot of marching. I went on one march. I was on the south side, and I remember telling my wife that I'm going on this march. And she said, well, okay, be careful. It ain't no big thing. But I look at a lot of the marchers as being very, very brave and responding to the call of not responding. Because I couldn't do that. I mean, I'm down there, I forget where it was, and I'm looking over at some guy holding a shovel. I mean, we were there and we would start singing, we shall overcome, we shall overcome. And this guy was holding a shovel. He was standing on the side with a whole bunch of white folk. And he caught my eye and he was just glaring at me, and I thought, if this sucker, excuse my language, makes a break over here, I'm gonna pick up whatever I can and try to knock his head off, you know. And I realized then I wasn't for marching, because I wasn't able to really concentrate on the march. You know, I knew it was a good thing, but I would be watching around and I would probably mess up the whole thing.
When you were participating in that march, besides the guy with the shovel, what else did you see? What other kind of atmosphere did you feel was there?
Well, the reason I only went on one march is because I felt threatened. You know, I was born and raised in this city, okay? I could go any place I want to. My dad used to take us down on National Avenue and all over this place. So here's a situation where I got to march to some place where there was a lot of people that didn't like me, okay? So I resented the whole thing of having to march, you know, which is the nonviolent way that Martin Luther King and everybody said is the way we have to go. And I think that's valid even to this day against programs and policies that inhibit civil rights, not just for black people, but for a lot of people. We don't do any marching, and there's a reason why we don't do that nowadays.
So after that one march, after that experience, you said that's not for you.
Yes.
So what did you do during that period?
Well, I helped Maryland organize the school boycott, okay? I taught at the school boycott. I worked with James and other people at the place where generally the youth council met to talk to them about education, to talk to them about the opportunities that were available. You know, if you got an education, because you know those kids, those youth council kids, most of them never wound up doing anything. Most of those kids died penniless because they were, James was very concerned about that. Most of those kids were dropouts. Most of those kids had no place else to go. And James gave them housing, he gave them something to do, and he gave them something to do that they were proud of, and he was part of their education. That's the reason this man, James Groppe, needs to go down in history as one of the most profound people, you know, in this country, to what he did and what he didn't have to do. You know, he was born in Milwaukee, had, you know, grocery store on the south side where I used to go and get good kielbasa and stuff. So I worked with James. I worked with taught in the Freedom Schools. I took photographs along with Richard Carter. I remember Maryland and some of the people from the East Side, because we need to remember there were a lot of white folk that were involved in that.
Who do you remember besides?
Let's put in there. I even got some of them written down there. Let's put in Ruth Zabrinsky. Do you know Ruth?
I don't.
Yeah, you need to talk to her. Ruth Zabrinsky and Lynn, her husband. Ben Barkin, and you know Ben. He was very much involved there. Seymour Lefkoe. You know Seymour?
Heard the name.
Sure. I mean, these people, with the exception of Ruth and Lynn, have passed away. Jack Norman worked for the Journal at the time. You know Jack? Mm-hmm. And was a very, very good writer and supporter of the civil rights movement, as well as Frank Alcoffer, you know, who is retired down in Washington now. So, you know, there was a lot of participation, and of course there were a lot of black folk involved, but sometimes we have the feeling or the perception that this was a black thing. And Marilyn Morehouser, a statue needs to be raised to her, because she was the backbone of this whole problem with segregated schools. She became editor of the Milwaukee Star newspaper.
Working from a journalist's point of view, since you were working with the Star, what did you try and sort of stay neutral on these issues, or did you write from a passionate perspective, or did you look at it? What sort of approach did you take?
Well, you know, I wasn't sort of a reporter. They gave me an assignment after a while of checking on the nightlife, which was fun because you had a lot of places where black people could go. White people were there too. White people, Hispanics, everybody, okay? Not like it is now, okay? If you go to some of these joints around here, you better take your pistol with you, you know? So at that time, there was an environment. And of course, I was the graphic designer. I did the cartoons. I made up the pages, okay? But I learned a lot from Richard Carter and Jay Anderson, who were both writers. Jay passed away a couple of years ago, and Richard's in New York now, writing for the Amsterdam News, part-time, I guess, you know. And I learned a lot from those guys, how they wrote, and it helped me. I still write, but my writing needs a lot of editing, because I have a tendency to use adverbs and adjectives. You being a journalist, man, so you know what that is, okay? I have a tendency, after I finish writing something, I have to go to the editor, and they begin ticking all kinds of stuff. You know, you don't have to say he was a jive. Just say he was a crook. So that's what I learned, and it's helped me to this day. And I give those guys, Frank Alcoffer, who I read his articles, he was very instrumental in reporting on everything that happened in the civil rights movement. Even today, I and Greg Stanford are very good friends. Greg and I worked together for a while during the years when the Millsap era was here, James Millsap, and the start of OIC, which is another organization that has been destroyed for not a lot of reasons, as well as the other organizations, you know, that haven't been destroyed but almost decimated. That includes the Spanish Center, which is sort of standing down there. But the organizations that used to exist SDC, okay, Urban League, and I forget there are a couple of more, Sherman Park Community Organization, Midtown. Some of those are no more. Purposely killed by city administration. And we could get into that. I don't know if you want to get into that too.
Let's not get too far afield from what we really need to talk about. The actions during that period, what kind of impact do you think that had on you and your family?
Well, my family supported me. You know, my children were small. I often felt that I might be neglected them to some degree, and I know that other families might have felt that a little bit more than I did. But my wife was very supportive, okay? And so it didn't have much, I mean, it was right. It was the right thing to do. I mean, it wasn't new to me. You know, my mother and father came from the South. And they knew what was going on down there, okay? My dad and two white dudes and a Hispanic brother almost got killed here in Milwaukee because they took their jobs back. They were working for the city. This is when I was about 6, 7 years old. And the city, you want to hear this story?
Yeah, tell me.
Okay. And the city laid them off, you know, because they got some more people, some kind of favoritism. So I remember my mother, she told me about it later, and I remember this pot-bellied stove there, almost red hot, and I remember these guys gathering in the room, and because I'm looking out the window, looking out the door, and I remember them. They had shovels and bats. Now I could understand the shovels because they were supposedly going to work, but I couldn't understand the bats. Well, we lived on 6th and Lloyd at the time. The job was on Farwell and North Avenue. And so, you know, as you walk from 6th and Lloyd and you get to Reservoir Park, you know, Reservoir Park used to have that American Legion thing, and from Reservoir Park you could see almost to Farwell and North Avenue. And then my dad and a Hispanic guy, I forget his name, and another black guy and a couple white guys, they hung together. They're going to get their jobs back. So my mother told me about this because I wasn't there. Said as they were walking across North Avenue and the foreman could see them coming, he knew that they were serious because they had bats. So he immediately pointed to 6 or 7 people on the job and told them to go back to the Union Hall. And so my dad, this Hispanic guy, and his other people and everything, they didn't miss a trick. They just put their bats down and started to working, okay? So this idea of militancy is not new. John Givens held up City Hall, you know John, right? He sat in City Hall, said, you're not going to do anything here until, okay, this stuff gets done. You know, Ruth Zabrinsky resigned from the City Civil Rights Commission. Do you know they have a Civil Rights Commission? It does nothing now.
It doesn't do anything now, but I remember when it was formed.
That's right.
Right.
And so you got Tom Jacobson, who worked with Lloyd for a while. Got his head busted in, I know, a couple of times, I understand. So the whole idea of nonviolence worked most of the time. But I remember when Marilyn and some other people, we were asked to go up there and support them, and they stopped the bulldozer from digging in the ground to build another segregated school. I mean, when I say stop, they laid down in front of the bulldozer. You know, so when we talk about civil rights, I think we have a tendency to put it in some little small category, you know, because the civil rights is as germane to everybody in this country as it is to this country. and nobody has a corner on it. In other words, you know, whose ox is gored the most, huh?
So during this period, there were the marches going on, the open housing marches, but there were other things going on too that you brought up, that you've mentioned. Do you think all of this was successful?
Sure, because it created changes. Certainly, Barbie had an effect on segregated schools. Certainly, the marches on the South Side opened up avenues so that people could move where they wanted to. I was just telling your assistant that I forget his name. I keep forgetting his name, but Greg Squires, who was a do you know Greg?
I know the name.
Right. He's down in Washington, D.C. And Greg Squires and a Hispanic guy, I forget his name, would go around to the mortgage companies. Because it's one thing to have open housing, but if you don't get a mortgage, and Greg was jumping on these people about mortgage denials. You know, so it did a lot. And it not that, I mean, we come up with different technologies today, but we need the kind of overall civil rights attitude as we did in those days, because it desegregated the schools, you know, and of course that was a kind of, what is it called, oxymoron, because what happened is we have a situation now where we have schools overflooded, particularly public schools, with black people.